Farmers in China's Xinjiang province are transforming barren desert into flourishing farmland. No one believed it when China announced plans to transport millions of live fish into one of Earth's most arid regions and simply release them there. Experts labeled it reckless, even absurd. The desert, they insisted, destroys everything. Yet 1 year later, when scientists returned to assess what had survived, they discovered something no one could explain. What they witnessed in the heart of the sand fundamentally changed everything we thought we understood about life itself. It's harvesting season, but we're not discussing harvesting pumpkins, corn, apples, or any traditional land-grown crops. Rather, we're talking about land-grown seafood. The purpose behind the impossible vision. When news initially spread that China was transporting millions of live fish into the middle of a desert, it sounded like something from science fiction. People around the world questioned why a country renowned for its powerful coastal fishing fleets would relocate seafood farming to a place without an ocean. The answer began years before the first fish were transported out. China was confronting a major food security crisis driven by climate change, pollution, and the limitations of its own success. By the early 2020s, China's coastlines were struggling to meet national seafood demand. Decades of overfishing and industrial expansion had pushed numerous marine ecosystems to their breaking point. The South China Sea and the East China Sea, which had once supplied much of the nation's shrimp, crab, and salmon, were warming rapidly. These warmer waters disrupted the breeding cycles of fish, requiring cold, oxygen-rich conditions to reproduce. Coral bleaching, plastic waste, and toxic runoff from factories compounded the problem, making once productive coastal zones unstable. Simultaneously, global studies by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations revealed that the world was heading into a long-term seafood shortage. The FAO projected that global demand for seafood would double by 2035, while natural marine stocks would decline by approximately 30%. For China, which consumed more fish than any other nation on Earth, this forecast was alarming. Even though the country had constructed the world's largest aquaculture industry, it could no longer rely solely on the ocean. Extreme weather events such as typhoons and red tide outbreaks were damaging coastal farms and destroying harvests within hours. China's planners began asking a difficult question. How could a country of more than 1 billion people continue to feed itself if the oceans kept changing? The answer they developed was rooted in the concept of inland aquaculture. Instead of relying on coastal environments, China would relocate fish farming inland to more controlled and protected areas. By using advanced water management, artificial seawater systems, and climate-stable basins, fish could be raised far from the unpredictable conditions of the open sea. This decision was also tied to the government's larger goal of achieving what officials called food sovereignty. China wanted to protect itself from global supply disruptions, trade disputes, and foreign dependency. Importing high-value seafood from distant markets had become expensive and politically risky. By building a domestic system that could produce the same species under tightly managed conditions, China would secure its own supply chain and stabilize prices. Environmental scientists supported the move for another reason. They saw it as a chance to test new sustainable technologies. Traditional ocean farming often releases waste into open waters, creating local pollution and disease problems. Closed inland systems, by contrast, could recycle water, control nutrient levels, and reduce ecological damage. The idea of converting non-arable land into productive fish farms fit perfectly with the country's long-term climate adaptation strategy. The project was also about scientific ambition. Chinese researchers wanted to prove that food could be grown anywhere on Earth, even in places once thought too dry or too saline to support life. They viewed it as a test case for the future of global agriculture. If humanity could create marine ecosystems on land, then food production could expand into regions previously dismissed as wastelands. This would not only help China, but also provide a model for other nations facing drought and resource scarcity. Yet China's scientists knew that no amount of technology could make fish survive without water. The greatest obstacle to the desert aquaculture project was not the heat or the soil. It was the simple question of where to find enough clean, sustainable water in a place defined by its dryness. And that was when they turned their attention to Xinjiang, home to the vast Taklimakan Desert, uncertain of what they would find beneath its endless sand. The hidden water secret. When China's research team first arrived in Xinjiang, their confidence was mixed with doubt. They were entering the Taklimakan Desert, one of the driest and most unforgiving places on Earth. The sand seemed endless, and the air was so dry that even their equipment struggled to function properly. The heat shimmered across the plains, and the silence of the desert made the task ahead feel even more impossible. Many within the group quietly wondered if they were chasing a myth. How could fish ever exist here when not even a single river could be seen? Yet they also understood that if they failed to find water, the entire project would collapse before it even began. Xinjiang's geography, while harsh, is full of hidden complexity. It sits inside a massive basin surrounded by the Tian Shan Mountains to the north, the Kunlun Range to the south, and the Altai Mountains to the northwest. These mountains hold vast glaciers that store millions of cubic meters of frozen freshwater. During the summer months, when temperatures rise, the glaciers release meltwater that travels down through narrow valleys. Much of it seeps underground, disappearing beneath layers of sand and rock. Over thousands of years, this continuous melting and infiltration created deep aquifers and hidden streams beneath what appears to be barren desert. The first real evidence of this underground water came from a small group of hydrologists who were part of China's early desert research division. In 2018, they began collecting soil samples and thermal readings that suggested moisture existed deep below the surface. The results were inconsistent, but they were enough to raise questions. Could there really be a hidden water network flowing beneath the Taklimakan? Many senior experts dismissed the theory as speculation. They argued that even if groundwater existed, it would likely be too deep or too saline to support anything. Despite these doubts, the team pushed forward. They decided to bring in more advanced technology to find out the truth. Between 2018 and 2022, the Chinese Academy of Sciences launched an extensive hydrological mapping program in the desert. The researchers used satellite-based radar and ground-penetrating sensors to scan beneath the sand. The data that returned to their screens was astonishing. Underneath what looked like lifeless terrain, they detected vast underground formations filled with flowing water. These were not small pockets or stagnant pools. They were massive aquifers connected to the surrounding mountain glaciers, replenished every year as ice melted in summer. For the scientists on the ground, it felt like uncovering a hidden ocean. The team immediately set out to verify the findings through on-site drilling. They drilled at several points where the data showed the strongest signals of water flow. Each time the drill cut deeper into the sand, the researchers held their breath. When water finally gushed up from one of the test wells, clear and cold, the camp erupted in celebration. It was more than a technical success. It was a breakthrough that turned a theoretical project into something real. Hydrologists began testing the water's quality, measuring temperature, mineral composition, and oxygen levels. The results were far better than expected. The water was clean and cold, with temperatures ranging from 8 to 12 degrees Celsius, conditions suitable for species that normally live in cold rivers and seas. The oxygen content was high, and the natural mineral balance was stable. These results meant that the desert's underground water could actually support aquatic life without extensive chemical treatment. The discovery also revived an ancient connection. Historians on the team recalled the old Carrez tunnels once built by early settlers in the same region. Those tunnels had carried water from the mountains to oasis towns centuries ago. The realization that modern scientists were retracing the paths of those ancient engineers added a sense of continuity and pride. With water confirmed, the scientists could finally move from speculation to creation. Their next step was to transform this hidden resource into something fish could grow in. Engineering a desert ocean. The day the first aircraft touched down in the desert was described by one engineer as the moment theory met reality. Months of planning had led to this single breathtaking gamble. The sky above the Taklimakan was cloudless, the sand below unbroken for miles. Yet in that emptiness, a team of engineers, chemists, and technicians gathered around a line of aircraft carrying thousands of living fish. Each tank on board was filled with oxygenated water and monitored for temperature stability. The operation was enormous and the stakes were high. Every decision from this point forward would determine whether China's desert experiment would succeed or fail. Before any fish could enter the desert environment, the team had to build something that had never existed there before. Their goal was to create a stable, life-supporting aquatic system from the ground up. The Chinese Ministry of Agriculture had approved the experiment in early 2023, granting permission for millions of fish fry and shellfish seedlings to be relocated from coastal hatcheries to inland testing sites. Two of the main receiving areas, near Aral City and Tumsuk, had been chosen because they were close to underground water sources and had the right terrain for constructing artificial basins. The engineering work began with the creation of massive lined ponds designed to hold and regulate water. Ordinary soil could not contain it, so the ground was excavated and sealed with thick synthetic layers to prevent leakage. These liners were then covered with gravel and clay to protect them from tearing and to reduce heat absorption. Once sealed, the ponds were connected to controlled pumping systems that drew clean underground water into the basins. Every pond was equipped with aeration devices to keep the water oxygenated and to prevent stagnation. Sensors were installed to record data on pH, temperature, and salinity. One of the most complex challenges was replicating the composition of seawater. Marine life depends on specific mineral balances that cannot be achieved with fresh water alone. Chemists worked in small on-site laboratories to develop an artificial seawater formula. They added sodium, magnesium, calcium, and potassium in carefully measured quantities until the salinity levels matched those of coastal oceans. The process involved repeated testing and adjustment. Technicians took water samples every few hours and ran chemical analyses to make sure the balance was right. At one point, the concentration of magnesium was too high, and the test tanks showed signs of stress in the microorganisms introduced to the water. Correcting that single error took days, but the persistence of the team paid off when the readings finally matched natural seawater. At the same time, microbiologists focused on preparing the environment's biological foundation. They introduced halophilic, or salt-tolerant, bacteria that could survive in high salinity water. These microorganisms played a vital role in stabilizing the chemistry of the ponds by breaking down waste and producing nutrients for aquatic plants. Without them, the water would quickly become toxic. Engineers also used layers of crushed basalt and fine clay to neutralize the natural salts present in the desert soil, which could otherwise alter the pond chemistry. The goal was to create a self-sustaining environment where both microorganisms and fish could coexist. Temperature control became another major obstacle. Daytime heat in the desert could reach 40 degrees Celsius, far too high for aquatic life. To solve this, the team built wide shade structures above the ponds and installed cooling towers that reduced the surface temperature through controlled evaporation. The system required constant monitoring, and for several weeks, the researchers worked in shifts around the clock. They described those nights as some of the most intense of their careers, watching the sensors flash on their screens as they made small adjustments to keep the conditions stable. By late summer of 2023, the first testing basins were ready. The chemical balance was correct, the microbial ecosystem was active, and the temperature remained consistent. The team gathered around the edge of one large basin to witness what they had worked toward for months. Aircraft from coastal provinces such as Hainan and Fujian arrived carrying oxygen-sealed containers of live fish fry and shellfish seedlings. Technicians checked each tank's temperature, while others prepared water samples from the basins to confirm compatibility. When the first containers were opened and the fish were released into the newly created water, the team watched in silence. For several minutes, no one spoke. The fish hovered near the surface, adjusting to the new environment. Then, slowly, they began to move deeper, swimming steadily and spreading across the basin. Relief spread through the group. Some of the researchers clapped while others stood in quiet disbelief. They had just witnessed something no one had thought possible. That moment marked the beginning of a new chapter. The artificial ocean was no longer an idea. It was real, functional, and alive. Yet even in their celebration, a question remained. Could these fish truly survive in this man-made sea? Or would this first success fade as quickly as it appeared? The heat of the desert pressed down, and every scientist present understood that one small imbalance could destroy everything they had built. The science of survival. In the following days, engineers watched the water's readings almost constantly. Temperature, oxygen, and salinity were measured every hour. The fish showed signs of stress at first. Some clustered near the aeration vents where oxygen was, most concentrated. A few floated to the surface, disoriented by the strange new environment. For the scientists, those early hours were the longest they had ever experienced. But within a week, something changed. The fish began to adapt. They started swimming evenly across the ponds, feeding on the small particles of nutrients suspended in the water. This was the moment the team realized that life could exist in the desert's engineered waters. It was no longer just a mechanical experiment, it was an ecological event. Yet one question still remained unanswered. Could delicate species such as salmon survive and grow here? Salmon were chosen for the next phase because they are known to be among the most sensitive fish in aquaculture. They need cold, oxygen-rich water to live. Even a small change in temperature or pH can cause them to die. If salmon could thrive in the desert's conditions, it would prove that the system was stable enough for any species. The biologists planned the tests carefully. They selected reservoirs in Nilka County, a region fed by glacial water from the Tian Shan Mountains. The temperature there remained close to 12 degrees Celsius throughout the year, nearly identical to the natural environment salmon prefer in coastal or northern rivers. Floating cages were assembled across these reservoirs to give scientists control over the fish's surroundings. The cages were made of lightweight metal frames and durable nets that allowed free water flow while keeping the fish contained. Each cage was set at a different depth to test how the salmon responded to variations in light and pressure. The researchers monitored them with underwater cameras connected to a central data hub. Every movement was recorded and analyzed. It was one of the most detailed biological studies ever conducted in inland aquaculture. Feeding was another part of the experiment that required precision. Automated feeders were installed above the cages. These machines released microprotein pellets at regular intervals, and sensors detected how quickly the fish consumed the food. Artificial intelligence systems adjusted the feeding schedule based on the fish's activity level, ensuring that the salmon ate the right amount without waste. This not only kept the water cleaner, but also reduced stress on the fish. The first few weeks showed slow progress. Growth rates were below expectation, and a few fish displayed erratic movement. But as the system stabilized, the salmon began to grow faster than expected. By the third month, Blood oxygen readings taken from sample fish matched those of salmon raised in coastal farms. This was a major milestone. The fish were not only alive but also healthy and reproducing at normal rates. The water remained clear, and the oxygen sensors indicated a stable environment. Biologists documented that the salmon had adapted to the artificial seawater just as well as they would have in a natural ocean. One of the most surprising findings was how the fish improved the ecosystem itself. Their waste provided nutrients that supported microscopic plants and algae, which in turn helped purify the water by absorbing excess carbon and nitrogen. This natural cycle reduced the need for artificial filtration systems. The reservoirs began to regulate themselves, forming what scientists called a self-balancing aquatic environment. The initial plan estimated that full-sized salmon would take 3 years to reach harvest weight. Yet, within 18 months, the fish reached market size. This was credited to the stability of the temperature and the absence of external stress factors, such as tides or predators. The success was beyond anyone's expectation. The 2024 yield from the inland reservoirs exceeded 7,000 tons, a result that was once considered impossible. When the data was presented at a national science forum, it drew international attention. Experts who had dismissed the project as a publicity stunt now called it one of the most important achievements in sustainable aquaculture. With that proof in hand, the team's mission began to change. The Smart Desert. As the salmon farms began producing results beyond expectation, the focus shifted to control and efficiency. The challenge was no longer whether fish could live in the desert, but whether large-scale production could be maintained without human error. The solution came through technology. Each pond, reservoir, and basin across the region was transformed into a living data system. What began as a biological experiment evolved into one of the most advanced networks of precision aquaculture in the world. Every pond was fitted with arrays of sensors designed to collect information in real time. These small devices measured oxygen levels, salinity, pH balance, temperature, and water clarity. The data from every sensor flowed into a central control system that analyzed conditions across the entire network. The moment any reading drifted away from the ideal range, the system responded automatically. If oxygen dropped too low, aeration pumps switched on. If temperature climbed too high, cooling systems activated to restore balance. The farms no longer relied on manual checks or visual inspection. Every part of the environment was continuously monitored and adjusted through automation. The artificial intelligence platform at the center of the operation acted as the brain of the system. It processed millions of data points each day and learned from patterns in fish behavior and water chemistry. The algorithms identified early signs of stress in fish populations by tracking subtle changes in movement and feeding speed. Once the AI detected a potential issue, it adjusted feeding schedules, water flow, and lighting to correct it before any damage occurred. This predictive response saved thousands of tons of fish that might otherwise have been lost to environmental fluctuations. Edge computing systems made it possible for these adjustments to happen instantly, even in remote areas without stable internet connections. Each farm had local processors capable of analyzing data on site. This allowed real-time corrections without waiting for central approval. For example, oxygen levels tend to drop before dawn because aquatic plants consume oxygen at night. The local processors learned to anticipate this pattern and automatically triggered aeration pumps minutes before the levels began to fall. Such micro-level management turned every farm into a self-regulating ecosystem that required minimal human intervention. Satellite integration added another layer of intelligence. The Beidou satellite network tracked temperature changes, atmospheric patterns, and glacial runoff from the surrounding mountains. This information allowed the AI to forecast how much fresh water would enter the reservoirs during the melt season and adjust water use accordingly. It also helped prevent overflow and ensured that temperature and salinity remained within safe limits. The satellites acted as the eyes of the system, observing environmental shifts that could affect the desert aquaculture long before they reached the ponds. Energy management was also built into the design. Solar panels lined the edges of the fish farms, supplying power to pumps, filters, and automated feeders. During daylight hours, the system generated enough energy not only to run operations, but also to store excess electricity for nighttime use. This renewable setup reduced dependency on fossil fuels and kept the entire operation environmentally sustainable. Food safety and traceability were handled through blockchain technology. Each fish was tagged digitally from the moment it was introduced as a fry until it was harvested. Every movement, feeding record, and health inspection was logged in a transparent database that buyers could access through a simple scan. This guaranteed that every product reaching the market could be traced back to its exact pond and growth conditions. It also helped build consumer trust, especially in high-value export markets that demanded strict verification. The efficiency of this system led to a dramatic increase in production. A single processing plant could handle up to 50 tons of salmon each day with near-zero spoilage. The facilities maintained a steady temperature of 5 degrees Celsius to preserve freshness. The automated machinery worked around the clock, moving fish from harvest to packaging within hours. The precision of the process meant less waste and higher profitability. Soon, analysts began comparing the desert farms to traditional coastal operations. The results were striking. The controlled inland systems reported lower disease rates, faster growth, and higher feed efficiency than many established fisheries in Norway and Japan. What had started as a national experiment had now become a benchmark for technological farming. And as the first full year of operations came to a close, the moment of truth arrived. The farms that had once been dismissed as an impossible dream were now ready for their first large-scale harvest. The Desert Harvest Revolution. 1 year after the first fish were released, the desert looked completely different. Long rows of ponds shimmered under the sunlight, and automated cranes moved slowly above the water. When harvest season arrived, the scene was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Thousands of salmon and groupers, their scales glinting like silver, were being lifted from the water and collected into temperature-controlled containers. Workers in protective suits moved quickly along the platforms, guiding robotic nets and inspecting the fish as they emerged from the ponds. The air was filled with a faint scent of fresh water and machinery, a sign that life and technology had finally merged in the heart of the desert. Within 2 hours of being caught, the fish were cleaned, sorted, and packed in fully automated facilities located near the ponds. Conveyor systems guided the fish through processing units where robotic arms handled each step with exact timing. Cold chain logistics ensured that the temperature never rose above 5 degrees Celsius. This strict control preserved quality and freshness for long-distance transport. The fish were then sealed in insulated packaging and moved into refrigerated trucks, waiting at the edge of the site. From there, the journey across China began. Trucks carried the cargo to Urumqi's air freight terminals, where shipments were loaded onto planes bound for major cities. In less than 24 hours, salmon grown in the desert reached restaurant kitchens in Shanghai, Beijing, and Shenzhen. Chefs described the product as indistinguishable from ocean-caught fish. Some even said the flavor was cleaner and more consistent because the water conditions were precisely managed. For distributors, the efficiency of the system was revolutionary. What had once been a logistical nightmare for inland producers had become a seamless, high-speed supply chain. The commercial results were extraordinary. By the end of 2024, online seafood sales from the desert farms had reached nearly 395 million yuan, more than doubling from the previous year. The growth was fueled by e-commerce platforms that allowed consumers to order directly from the farms. Live stream marketing and short videos showed workers harvesting salmon in the desert, capturing the imagination of millions of viewers. The phrase "desert salmon" became a symbol of modern innovation and sustainability. Restaurants began advertising it as a premium product, and customers were willing to pay higher prices for the novelty and environmental appeal. Scientists monitoring the project were equally impressed. More than 100 aquatic species had successfully adapted to the engineered ecosystem. These included freshwater and marine varieties, proving that the environmental design could support a wide range of life. The success also had measurable environmental benefits. The recycling system reduced freshwater use by 60% compared to traditional aquaculture. Microalgae bioreactors installed near the ponds absorbed carbon dioxide and produced organic fertilizer for nearby farms. This created a closed-loop cycle where waste became a resource and production generated almost no pollution. By early 2025, the desert aquaculture industry was valued at more than 30 billion yuan, making it one of the fastest-growing economic sectors in the region. Export inquiries began arriving from neighboring countries, eager to learn how such results were achieved. Delegations from the Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Bank visited the sites to study what they called the Xinjiang model. For nations struggling with drought and declining farmland, the project offered a practical solution rather than a distant dream. A year earlier, many experts had called the idea reckless. Now, it stood as evidence that even the most hostile landscapes could become productive if approached with imagination and science. What do you think about China's decision to grow fish in the desert? This remarkable achievement demonstrates how innovation, technology, and determination can transform the impossible into reality, offering hope for sustainable food production in the face of global challenges.